You have community members, like you say, maybe they're your video game community or your hobby community or whatever they are. Maybe they aren't the person that you go to do your deep emotional processing with, but they might be the right people to go to help get some meals or to help you move things or, unpack things or et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Yes. And that's support that we need too. It's not just the will you hold me while I cry kind of support.
That's what I'm trying to say. There's will you hold me while I cry kind of support. And then there's like everything else, which is a huge category.
Yeah. Yes. Hey, Selysa.
Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back. So this time we're talking about getting support as a grieving person. We have the amazing guide that you've created, and you got a little help from me on, but mostly you created. I just want to give props where props are due.
Thank you.
And I love what you created, and I want to make sure to take the opportunity to walk people through that so that they can become familiarized with it and use it. But we also have a few ideas, general ideas that we want to discuss before that, just around this idea of getting the support that we need as we're navigating grief.
Yeah, and I think the first concept to take into account is just opening to receiving support. That's the hardest hurdle for a lot of people to overcome, acknowledging that they need it and then being actually receptive to it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is definitely aside from just navigating what's happening to us as we're grieving the loss of this, of our person, this idea of like, how do we help ourselves get through it? Well, I might need to get some help. That's just such a huge leap. And I think so many of us are used to navigating our lives without asking for much help. And there's, I think, a lot of even kind of cultural encouragement to, especially in America, even more than the West in general, to do it on your own and to handle and to not make it other people's problems and to not like make it more dramatic than it needs to be. And this kinds of, especially with grief, dampers to the impulse to get help. So yeah, being willing to allow ourselves to receive support at all, I think is huge.
Yeah, I think that goes to say that we're not actually meant to grieve alone.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point, and I'm so glad you said it. Francis Weller, who wrote The Wild Edge of Sorrow, talks about that a lot, this sort of dual process of the importance of being with ourselves in it, and that is a solo project sometimes, but that grief and the expression of it is very much a communal project.
Yes, I love that term, a communal project.
Yeah. And I think, too, that says something about, especially if we think of older communities, older societies of humans where we were maybe more directly dependent on each other. If one of us was in a grieving process, the rest of us really needed to know that and to be able to work around that. We were going to feel that shift or that difference of the one person or the few people being really taken out by their grief. And so even though we have it's less in our faces, there's still that, I think, human piece of when someone in our community is going through grief or through the grieving process, it affects all of us. It's not just them going through. It's not just an isolated thing over there.
Yeah.
So along the lines of being willing to allow ourselves to receive support is being willing to then seek it.
To be proactive.
Yeah, because I believe, and I say it this way on purpose because of my own experience, I believe there are lots of people who want to help us, who would love to be of support to us in our grieving process, and they don't know how.
Yes. Yes, 100% yes. So many people dropped off the radar for me shortly after my mother died. And then about 2 years later, circled back around and said, I really wanted to be there and I just didn't know what to say. And I just didn't know what to do.
Yeah. And I think it's particularly challenging in our society where, like we've already said, there's cultural messaging that is a dampening effect on having feelings. Like if you're having uncomfortable feelings, somebody's blown it. If you can't deal with it by yourself, you're blowing it. If you have to get some help, you're working at a deficit, or there's maybe something wrong with you, right? And all of that kind of works against us in a moment like this, where we actually, in a grieving process, we need support. It's such a high stressful situation that is a single human nervous system. It's just far more than we can bear on our own.
Yes, absolutely.
But then there are people who love us and care about us and who want to help us. And because of the way we get taught to work with feelings, we don't have a shared language. We don't have a shared process. We don't have steps that people know to take with someone who's going through something like a loss.
Absolutely. So we're here to provide a roadmap.
That's right. So I think that's so I love that you brought it in that way. Everything we're saying here, I think, is highly useful for someone who's going through a grieving process. It's also quite useful if you know someone who's going through a grieving process, right? Because they're going to be navigating these pieces, and you can support them by just showing up. And like, I know that you need help. Everyone needs help in a grieving process. Let me know what I can do for you, right? Mm-hmm. I think another piece too around that, people not knowing how to support, is because we don't know how to work with feelings very well. And so anytime we have the sense that we're mentioning something that then the other person feels some upset around, oh no, we've kind of messed it up for them, right? Like, I don't want to talk about it because they're going to get upset. Well, they're already upset. They need to talk about it.
Yeah.
So we're not doing them any favors by avoiding them or avoiding the subject or pretending as though the grieving isn't happening.
Exactly. So I think what you're saying is that as the supporter person, tactfully bringing up grieving is far superior than trying to pretend like it didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, or just move on, or not, trying not to upset them by mentioning the person that they lost or the situation. Mm-hmm. I understand the kindness and the compassion that's involved there. We don't want to upset people, right? But again, a grieving person, even if they don't look like it right now, they're still upset. We're not saving them anything by ignoring the issue that they're constantly dragging around with them.
Yeah.
But I think it doubles back too. So like, number one is being willing to allow ourselves to receive support. Number two, being willing to seek it as people who want to support people who are going through grief as well. Being visible for for the people who are going through grief who may be struggling to ask for support, right? Mm-hmm. Attentive to those small little things that they may, oh, well, I'm having a hard time doing this or that, oh, I can help with that, or I'm struggling to manage this piece, they may let little things like that go that we can then be real clear and obvious that we're here for.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk to, like outside of reaching out, there are things that we can do. So realizing that we need support, I think, is huge. Being willing to get it is equally seismic in terms of getting support. But then even reaching toward, before you reach out to a friend or before you reach out to a support group, there are things that you can, like books, audiobooks, podcasts that you can lean into as a kind of support, even short of showing up and asking for it with someone that you know could help you.
Yeah, it has a really low barrier to entry, doesn't it?
Yeah, well put. Yes.
Yeah.
And, it's the kind of thing that we can do in private. If we have embarrassment about reaching out for support, I always recommend I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye by Brooke Noel and Pamela Blair. They wrote it as people who were also going through grieving. And they write it in a really beautiful way of signaling throughout the book that they are with you. They are helping you. They're here to support you with all of the things that they can think of come up for someone going through a grieving process. I love that one because I didn't have to say to anyone, oh, I'm going through this thing and what do I need to know? I just got this book and they gave me all of this information of, making sense and normalizing experiences I was having, helping me know things to look out for, even giving me ideas for how to get support. So finding a good book that really resonates with you. And there are some that are better than others, but I definitely recommend I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye. Or a podcast. I love having someone in my ears, talking to me in their soft podcast voice about, these important topics. And it's also often winds up being a thing that supports me to release some feelings too, because I think about what they're saying and it brings up something for me. But again, normalizing, validating, giving us ideas, sense of what to expect on this journey that so many of us are going through. I have liked Grief Out Loud, this thing called Grief, The Grief Coach, Grief Talk, and of course, Full-Time Grievers as podcasts to check out for that. What about you? Was there a book or a podcast or something like that that really spoke to you or has spoken to you?
Not particularly, actually. I've read several and always felt like they were missing the nuance that I needed.
Yeah, I think some of them really do.
Which kind of gets into the topic of complicated circumstances leading up to grief, which is another topic for another day.
For sure. Yeah.
What I found the most guidance for was I was 21 when my mom passed. And I didn't know anyone my age who had gone through a similar loss. And so what I did is I sought people who were in their 60s and 70s because I realized almost every single one of these people don't have their parents alive anymore. They've all gone through this, regardless at what stage of life they went through. And so I went to my grandparents and because I realized my grandparents don't have living parents. They lost their parents. So I went to my grandparents and I asked them what it was like for their parents to die. And I went to basically any old person I could get my hands on. I was like, "What? You've been here. You've done this. How did you do it?" And the answers were all really similar. Like, it's hard. Mm-hmm. It's hard. It wasn't easy. It takes time. It does get better. It's not always, it's going to be the same. Yeah. It's not going to go back to normal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There is no going back.
There's no back to what it was. It's moving forwards.
Yeah. I really appreciate that because I have also come across books that I love, but I would never hand to someone who's going through a grieving process. Like I mentioned Francis Weller's The Wild Edge of Sorrow. Fantastic book. Brilliant insights on the grieving process and ways to create ceremonies to help us all going through collective grieving. But I would never hand that book to someone who's in the depths of a grieving process.
No, I think that book is more for the practitioner seeking to create the space.
Yeah.
Seeking to create the grief ritual than it is the griever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And similar for The Grieving Brain, which I think is another amazing book by Frances O'Connor that is just has such incredible insights on the neuroscience of, what someone's going through in a grieving process. But again, not the kind of subtle, nuanced, tender, guide that you hand to someone who's lost someone who's really important to them. Mm-hmm. So
perhaps the distinction there is the difference between something that is soothing while still allowing you to feel your feelings, to participate in reading or listening to, and something that's scientific, something that's going to be like, this is what's going on for you. Like, great. Right. Now that I know the science, that's not making it any easier.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I think there's real use in getting that information and making use of that information, but it's just at a different time, a different part of the grieving process than that's this sort of initial, I've lost someone that's important to me. What do I do? Kind of support that we're talking about today. Yeah. So I'm glad that you, even in talking about it, you transitioned to the thing that I would mention next, which is lean on friends and family and community, right? If like you did, I think it's so brilliant for you to go to elders who had lost their parents. That's just like, I can't think of a better way to make use of your community, right? And the people that are already close to you who have knowledge that is useful to you. Mm-hmm. I also thought of things like, some people, they're members of churches or other kinds of religious groups like that can be really useful. Even your book club can be useful in this kind of community aspect. demographic groups that you might be in, your women's group, your men's group, or whatever it is. Even volunteer groups or fellow hobbyists. You might think, oh, well, like my fellow remote control or drone, flying friends aren't my grief community friends, but they're community that you already have. And just like friends and family, this community around, even something like a hobby can be a beautiful kind of support for us, a tremendous kind of support for us in these times, especially.
I think that also when people think of support that they need, they're probably thinking of someone who is emotionally safe to spill their hearts out to, and perhaps someone in your video game network isn't that, but there's so many different types of support that someone can need. They might need support moving out the last items from the person who passed away. Someone doesn't need to be a certified anything to help you move some furniture. And that's a great thing to call on someone from your video game network to help you with. There's like physical support, literally just getting your needs met, getting food in your body, getting water in your body. There's financial support. There's childcare support. There's so many different facets of ways that we can have things taken off our plate that other people can do for us, that they don't have to be the most emotionally attuned, developed person that you've ever met.
Yeah, that's so right on. I'm so glad you said that too. And I think folks will see it more or hear it more if you're just listening to us when we get into going through the guide, where you did such a great job of including those different kinds of help. But you're right. You have community members, like you say, maybe they're your video game community or your hobby community or whatever they are. Maybe they aren't the person that you go to do your deep emotional processing with, but they might be the right people to go to help get some meals or to help you move things or, unpack things or et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Yes. And that's support that we need too. It's not just the will you hold me while I cry kind of support.
That's what I'm trying to say. There's will you hold me while I cry kind of support. And then there's like everything else, which is a huge category.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think that's really an important piece to bring to the forefront too. The grieving person is going through the grieving process, which is its own full-time job, as we jokingly say, full-time grievers. But then there is all of the rest of their life that they're also still having to navigate while doing this whole other process. And so there's room for support on both sides. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
So then further along, outside of your immediate friends and family or community that you're already connected with, finding grief support groups, right? And I think a general grief support group is of immense value by itself. Just people who know what it's like to have lost someone and be navigating that just like we are. But I also think if you can find a support group that is specific to your loss, all the better, right? So if like me, you lost your brother, find a sibling loss support group. Or like you, parental loss support group, right? Or if you lost your partner or your children or a child or something like that. And that because those folks going through a similar kind of loss have more touchstones, more points in common with what our experience is like. They will know what it's like to, as you've experienced, not be able to call your mom up for advice or to share that thing, right? Which is different from not hearing your brother crack jokes about, whatever that they normally crack jokes about, right? It's like there are different things that we go through depending on the loss. And so finding other people who can identify with that can be really useful.
Yeah. One thing one woman who lost her mother very young told me was, the hard moments that people don't even realize is hard is when you're in a shop and two old ladies walk in. And one of them's the daughter and one of them's the mother. And you see, that daughter got to keep her mother until she was 65 years old and her mother is 90.
Yeah.
Like lucky them. And that pang of I missed out on these whole decades of my life without that person. That's something that only someone who lost a parent at a young age could tell me as someone who lost a parent at a young age. And
Right.
it was so validating to hear that. And then the first time it happened, I was like, oh, that's what she said. And it made it hurt less.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it happens to you, you feel like you're the only one.
Right.
But because she warned me about it, I saw it. And then I thought, oh, that's what that is. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I had a category in my mind for it.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Along those lines, I started wishing that like all shows and TV and movies or whatever that you watch would, and I don't really want this, but I started wishing they would just let us know if they were going to be talking about someone dying in it. We could have a whole nother set of podcasts episodes about trigger warnings, but I mean, I've never been one who's thought that that was really a necessary thing, but just that having that, running into that scenario of, oh, I didn't expect that there would be something that would touch on my grief here. Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, I didn't realize that, was so disconcerting. And it seemed like it was just everywhere I went. So to have these moments where someone has been through it, through something like what we're going through, who can say, oh yeah, and there's this thing that happens, or I experienced this, you might too. That can be so useful just in setting an expectation that helps take a little of the sting out when we come into those moments. You know?
Yeah. And I think having the support from the people who went through the same category of grief warns you about those stings coming, because you don't know that. You don't know all of them. How could you?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
This episode is brought to you by the Center for Emotional Education and Sacramento Reiki Center, where we support full-time grievers every day. Many of our clients have tried everything and it still hasn't been enough. After our work together, they gain the tools and skills that they need to navigate their grief on their own. You can get more information at sacramentoreikicenter.com and centerforoemotionaleducation.com.
So along those lines, then, in terms of further support and more expert support, even, then finding a grief coach or a therapist, right? Mm-hmm. And someone, I definitely recommend, if you're going to someone to support you with grief, that you get someone who has grief support experience. Right?
Absolutely.
There's all kinds of great therapists out there, all kinds of great support out there, but if they don't have experience with grief in particular, you might be better served by finding someone who does.
Absolutely.
And I can even think of that from my own perspective. You know, I'm becoming an expert on grief, but I certainly wasn't one before this. I didn't set out to be one. I was someone who I thought of myself as an expert in working with feelings, right? And that's where my expertise has lied in the work that I've done. And now, having had the experience I've had with this version of grieving, even though I would have been of great support to, and I was of great support to grievers before I knew more, I now just have so much more it's like the difference between first grade and 12th grade or something, in terms of the difference in understanding of what it's actually like to experience it. Right. And so whether they've been someone who's supported a bunch of other grievers, or hopefully maybe someone who's even navigated a grieving process of their own, we definitely think experience goes a long way.
Yes.
And even like we were saying with supporter, like community members or support groups and specific support groups who have trod a similar path, they know something about what we're going to be going through. So having a support person, a therapist who knows something about what we're going to be going through is just so much more useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I have a few categories of support that I think are just real specific, right? There's self-care support, right? So going to a massage therapist, going to a yoga class, going to a workout class, going to meditation class, right? Where you get support from a group to take good care of yourself. Mm-hmm. Expression support, getting support to help us get feelings moving and out of us. So whether that's watching a movie that invites you to cry, or going to one of those smash rooms that they have now where you can break stuff on purpose, going with friends if that helps you, or writing a letter to your lost loved one. These things that you can do that are designed to help you express some of the feelings that you're hanging out with.
Because when you express your feelings, then you release them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're
And
not
then,
carrying as much of them.
yeah.
I think that's an undervalued part of the grieving process. A lot of folks, especially again in the West, especially even more in the US, we have this sense that we need to quickly tidy back up, put ourselves back together and get back to life, and some people say, what do they say? Move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we do that really as grievers. So normalizing this idea that this is a thing that we will be continuing to carry with us and that we will be continuing to need to find ways to let out of us so that we're not tamping it down, saving it up, and just carrying it longer and more painfully.
Yeah. That kind of goes with the learning to surf the waves of grief episode that we recorded.
Yeah. Then I think there's also getting energetic support. It's really important to express and to get feelings out of us, but then we're also carrying the energy of our emotion, as you know. And so getting support with working with that energy, as you so powerfully do with Reiki. There's also, shamanic work that folks do, chakra work that folks do. There's access bars, if you're familiar with that. Even emotion code, which is a kind of working with magnets and meridians to remove emotional energy. So there's lots of support that we can get to help us work with the energy that we're carrying of the grieving process too.
It just kind of like retouches on the concept of emotions of the body and having space for that energetic work through them allows for the body to release them. A lot of times people might even think they released it because they released it from their mind, but there's this whole physiological process still going on that needs to be addressed and moved through.
Mm-hmm. So important. And then there's always comes that eventuality when maybe we've set up an initial support early on. Maybe we've leaned really into the friends and family and community, and likely, especially early on, even if they don't know exactly how, or their approaches are not everything they wish they would be, folks do tend to lean more toward the grieving person earlier on. And then there comes this time where there's a lot of lean out. And it's not like people don't want to be there for us anymore. It's just that life goes on and they kind of get back to their own thing, and it's less present for them that we're still navigating this process.
Yeah. I think it's usually at about the 6-week mark.
Yeah. And I think, different folks who maybe are more or less tuned into what it's like to be grieving might last longer than that. But yeah, that's a really
approximation.
A great approximation for what I think most of us wind up experiencing. Yeah. So being willing to keep getting support after your friends and family have stopped reaching out, and as you continue to navigate the loss moving forward, it becomes like this next tier of vitally important support, right? After the first rush of supporters have moved on, so to speak, or they're just showing up less, we still need support. Our process is continuing on for many of us a year, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years after the loss. And so just because people have stopped leaning into us or out, to reaching out to offer support, or just because we've made it past the first couple of months, doesn't mean that we're done needing support. So continuing to be willing to call up those friends and family and community members, or get that grief coach that you thought you didn't need the first 6 weeks, or going
join
for
that, stay in
tier.
that group. Stay in that group.
Yes, that's right.
For months to years. Yeah. Keep reading the books.
Right. Yes. Keep listening to the podcasts. Keep reminding yourself, not just of the process that you're going through as it unfolds for you, but that there are things that you can do too, right? Ways that you can continue to actually support this process, not just have it working on you in the background. And then a couple of ideas, things like taking a class. Because I want to put it, our brain is trying to survive the stress of an excruciating learning process when we lose a loved one. It can be really supportive as we continue on to take on learning something new intentionally as another way to work with some of the stress that's coming up in this learning process.
I love that.
And it's kind of, I don't know if you do this. This might be a little bit of a difficult thing to try to explain, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. Sometimes, like when I have a splinter or a sore muscle even, or a sore joint, I press on it. I lean into it. And I know other people who do this, like, or you stretch it, you do your thing which is actually kind of increasing the pain a little bit temporarily. And then after you do that, there's this release where you feel a little less pain, right? Are you familiar with this?
No.
I think splinters are places where people do it the most, where they're like, is it still hurt? Oh yeah, it still hurts. Oh, I think we do it with all kinds of wounds. I do it a lot personally, and I know others who do. But this is kind of that same technology of you're going through this uncomfortable to excruciating learning process already, and there's stress involved in that, and it's an uncomfortable kind of learning process that most of us don't want to do, right? We don't want to learn to live without our loved one. But kind of pressing into that stress and taking on a learning that we do want to have has this way of helping our system move through that stress and make use of it in a way that is a benefit that we want to have.
I have an opinion.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you agree with this or not.
Okay.
Which is that for this learning, if it could particularly be something that is able to be an outlet of some sorts. Mm-hmm. For example, taking a painting class, something in the artistic realm, or a pottery class or a music class, something that's some sort of expressiveness. Mm-hmm. And this is where it's truly my opinion to not go so much into the heady subjects like chemistry. Mm-hmm. That going into those, I have seen many people use extremely heady topical learning as an avoidance mechanism.
Right.
Of the grieving process.
Yeah. Because
they're trying to put something else in their head.
Yeah.
Than the grief that's already there, as opposed to something that's more of an expressive outlet, like creative writing or anything that allows energy of any sorts to move through you and into something else.
I'm really with you on that. Yes.
Okay.
Both on I think we can use, it's called our task positive network, to distract us from the kind of rumination or thinking about our loved ones that can come up when we're in our what's called default mode network of our brain. So that is a way that we can use avoidance, I guess is the right way to put it. On one level, I think there's a survival benefit of that, because when we avoid in that way, we're lowering our stress levels. So as a temporary measure, and we've talked about this some, well, I'm sure we'll talk about it again, especially in the early period when grief is new for us and we're new to the grieving process, there's a heightened level of survival reactivity. And so doing some avoidance in that window of time can be, I think, useful to us and supportive as we're navigating that intensity.
The distraction helps to lower the intensity, to turn down the dial on the intensity so that you can come back to it and it's not so destabilizing.
Yeah. But the more we do that, the more we're saving for later.
Exactly.
So if that becomes our only strategy, we're just saving up the grief, as you say, avoiding it through learning this new chemistry project. I also think that it's quite a bit more challenging to learn the headier kinds of things during a grieving process, especially earlier on, because we have so much reactivity up that it's hard to get into that executive place to learn. I found myself a few times just like, I feel dumber right now. Like, I can't think right. And that's true. Like my thinking brain was interrupted by this process I was going through. I think that's true for so many of us.
Yeah.
But I think there's an additional beautiful thing about what you're talking about. If we lean into learning expressive arts, for example, then we're learning a new thing, which is a way to work with the stress of the learning process we're already going through in our grieving. But it's also a way to, like, if we're learning a way to express, then we're working on both ends, right? We're doing something with this stress right now, but we're also giving ourselves these avenues to let out more of these feelings later on.
Yeah.
I also think if we're doing it with our bodies, and it means we're moving our bodies, whether that's, painting, focus kind of movement, or, sculpture or dancing, then we're also getting the benefit of the neurochemistry that comes from that kind of physical movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So helpful too.
I also want to just add that art and math and science can absolutely be intertwined in fields such as carpentry or baking or keeping a sourdough starter or a garden. That these are all ways in which people can have the sciencey people out there. I don't want them to feel like I'm telling them not to do science.
Yeah. Yes.
Go do your science.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
But see how you can make your science or your math an art.
I love that. Yeah. Resonates so strongly with me. And the last thing that I was wanting to make sure that we mentioned was, and it kind of goes along with this idea of expression and, art in particular, is to team up with others who might be grieving the same person or people to create some kind of memorials. Right? These can be events, and we're used to the celebration of life kind of events, but I mean like a year out or 2 years out, or in an annual way, creating events that celebrate the person. Or physical memorials like a bench or a plaque or a headstone or a garden plot. I didn't team up with anyone to do it this year, but I planted a garden plot that was just for my brother this year, full of flowers that I know that he loves. Those kinds of things. Or even working together to create ideological memorials, right? Music, poetry, nonfiction, performances, these kinds of things. And teaming up with our people who are grieving the same person to do it is an additionally supportive way to do it, right? You can create these memorials on your own, and that's fine. I hope you will. But when you team up with your people who are grieving the same person to do it, there then becomes this level of mutual support too that I think is just so helpful in these processes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the grieving and community piece.
Yeah.
And the ongoing grieving and community piece.
Yeah. Yes. Not letting it just be a one and done kind of thing, I think I'll always regret the celebration of life for my brother, because it was a one afternoon event, but then we had other events through the course of the weekend. And even that, it was too quick. It was all so close to losing him that now I feel like we definitely need to have another one, and another one and another one.
Yeah. And you can.
Yeah. And I will.
You get to.
Yeah.
Good. Shall we dive into the document?
Let's do. Yeah. I think this is such a beautiful and powerful and highly useful thing you've created to help guide folks through this process of getting the support that we so surely need.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I created a document a lot of years ago, and it's called How to Receive Support While Grieving the Loss of a Loved One. And it's going to be available for download in a link somewhere where you're seeing this.
Right.
Look for the link to download this.
Yes.
It kind of starts with a brainstorm. So it's saying, get out a pen and paper or print this and write on this to brainstorm the support before you need it in that moment, so that when you need it, you've already done the work of brainstorming it. Because when you're needing it, you're not going to be able to brainstorm it.
Yeah.
And then I break down the different categories of support. So the first category is emotional support, and I give some starter examples for how to do that. The first one of which is an emotional support warm line. And so this is a phone number that anyone can call at any time to speak with before you're in the state of crisis. So the point of the warm line is to lessen the number of calls that go to the hotline.
Mm-hmm.
So to help to give people the mental health support that they need to come back to a state of regulation, even if they're not in total crisis.
Right. Yeah. And you gave both a number there and a link to a website. Both are really useful.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the crisis hotline. In the United States, anyone can call the number 988. And this is a national network of local crisis centers that provide free and confidential support for people in suicide crisis or emotional distress. So if you ever feel as though you are truly on that brink of super intensity, call 988.
Well, both the crisis hotline you have here and the emotional support warm line are 24/7 too. So folks don't need to worry about what time of day or night that they need support.
Exactly. Yeah. There's also a crisis text line. You can go to crisistextline.org and you can message with people if that feels more accessible than speaking to someone on the phone. And then there's grief processing sessions. There's bereavement groups, which we discussed already. And then there's some blink lines for the user to fill in other forms of emotional support that they may have access to that they already know about. And then we go to financial support. The first is a PayPal zero interest credit card for 6 months. Another one is to create a GoFundMe or an Everloved fundraiser. And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to give in these times of need. My cousin passed away earlier this year, and I posted about his GoFundMe, and people in my network who had never even met my cousin donated to his GoFundMe. And I was so moved by that. And an important thing when sending your GoFundMe out is to say, even if you can't support, if you can just spread the word, that would be just as helpful. And I realized that was true. Oh, I spread the word and more money was able to come in from that.
Yeah, I was also so moved by the financial support that came in for expenses for my brother. And I'm so glad that you have this as a category. You know, as we discussed already, there is the importance of emotional support, but there's a lot of different kinds of support that someone going through a grieving process might need. And this category in particular can be so important as we're navigating all of the expenses of, what might need to happen for our lost loved one, but also navigating the expense of being someone who's going through a grieving process and has the rest of their life to also work with.
Yeah.
So important.
And then there's asking your employer if they have bereavement leave. And if they don't, you can ask, will you make a bereavement leave policy?
Yeah. Yes.
And if they say no, they said no.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's enough emphasis on that in this country in particular, but I do think that there are lots of employers who recognize the importance of it and would be willing to work with you if you ask. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always worth it to ask. The
Absolutely.
worst they can say is no.
That's right.
And then there's some more blank lines for the user to fill in what other forms of financial support do they have access to. And that's for you to brainstorm so that when you need it, it's there. Which already creates a feeling of being supported, just knowing you have those resources should you need to call upon them.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we don't even need to call on them to experience the support of knowing that they're there.
And then I go into a brainstorm of listing things that other people can do for you that would feel good for you to receive. And I break it down into different categories. The first category is physical comfort. So this can be things such as setting up a meal train, getting childcare a couple of hours per week, things to have company with while you are moving your body, such as a friend to go with you to the gym or a fitness or yoga class or on a hike or a walk outside. And then there's some more blank lines. What else feels like physical comfort to you? And so this is really a time to sit and pause and think, what do I need to have that self-attunement, and write it down. And then there's emotional comfort. Something that my friend did for me after my mom passed away. I think I was calling her about 3 times a week, and I don't think that was sustainable for her. And she, after a couple weeks, she said, Selysa, I can talk with you on the phone for 1 hour per week, once a week. And I was like, that's so great. Thank you so much for telling me that. And the fact that she told me that, I didn't want to overstep her boundary by calling her too much, but I didn't know what the boundary was. And I was a lost little 21-year-old just calling up my best friend, and she wouldn't answer half the time anyway. So I was like, whatever, I'll try again later. But once I knew the structure of her capacity to support me, I was able to rely on it and anticipate it. So I was able to be like, oh, I'm going to bring this up next time I speak on the phone with her. And I was able to bookmark my need for support for that phone call I knew I was going to get in a couple of days. So a weekly phone conversation or a thoughtful text message might go on that list. Mm-hmm. Company doing your favorite hobby or therapeutic activity, or someone just sitting there with you can also be there. So far we have brainstormed how we can get physical and financial support and what physical and emotional support we would like to receive. Mm-hmm. The next step is to actually write down a list of people who have told you, I'm here for you. Let me know if you need anything. Because lots of people say this, but very few people know what to do with that. They think, oh, there's nothing that can do, that person can do for me.
Right. Well, and often when we hear that, we're in a state where we're like, I don't have a list right now, but okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And then we either forget that they offered or we forget to lean on them when we think of something. And so making this list of people who have said they'll be there for us, I think is just vital, really, in helping us remember to access that support.
Yeah. And if no one has reached out to offer support, it's really likely that few people know that you're going through a loss, and there might need to be a broader announcement of the loss. And announcing the loss is a way to really open yourself up to receiving this support. So this can be through social media posts, church or faith-based email requests, asking people to pray for you as you're going through this time of transition, friend or family group email lists, or just old-fashioned direct messages, letting people know.
Yes. And I think that's such a great category to include too, because the folks regularly have the experience of no one being there for them, but also having not shared with them what they were going through or what they need. I've found over and over and over again, I think you have too, and definitely I've heard this from other clients who've been in grieving processes, that people want to help and they don't know how. Mm-hmm. So I think this really helps.
So we're matching those two, the people who want to help and then the people who don't know how to receive it. We're giving the map for how to get that help.
That's right. Yeah.
The next step is to rewrite who offered support and what action you would love to receive from them. So someone might have said, I'm here for you if you need them, and they might be a total gym rat. So you might write down, Natalie, take me to the gym with you once a week.
That's right.
Another person might be really, really good with your kids. You might write, Peter, watch my kids for 2 hours while I have a date with myself. Mm-hmm. So to match the person's personality with that person's strengths, so that when the request is made, it's a compatible request.
That's right.
And then the very last step, which is the absolute hardest, but it is necessary to complete the process, is to actually send those messages. And I give lots of example messages if the wording is hard for how to really request that support. And something I'll point out here is that when you request a very specific thing for a specific duration of time at a certain frequency, that allows people to truly check in with themselves to see if they can commit to that. So you don't make a request saying, can you bring me a meal once per week?
Right.
Because they're going to think, oh no, how long am I signing up to do this for? I have my own life and responsibilities too. Right. But if you say, can you sign up for my meal train a few times in the next month? Or can you take me to the gym every other week for the next 6 weeks? Giving a frequency and an end date really helps people. And then they can always continue it. If they're like, you know what, I actually really like going to the gym with you. This is great. I like having a friend at the gym too. They can extend it. But if they feel, I can't do this anymore, it gives them an out.
That's right.
Which increases probability of saying yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I love the way that you created this guide to make it easier for people. And even at this level, in the language that you're supporting them to use, and even in the examples that you give there at the bottom, where if anyone is struggling to think of what to write in the reach out, asking for support, you've given them such great examples there to employ. Such a useful guide.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you made it this far, you should probably download it.
That's right. Yeah.
And find that link wherever we figure out where to put it and start filling it out.
Yeah.
I do believe it will help. And let us know. Please write to us and let us know if it is helpful or if you have any things that didn't work for you or didn't feel good. We would love to hear.
And bottom line, we hope that you'll do whatever you need to do to get the support that you need going through this grieving time that all of us need support going through.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks for listening to Full-Time Grievers. Please like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you find out when we release the next episode. If you have thoughts or questions about what we shared, please leave them in the comments below. And if this episode made you think of someone, we invite you to send it to them. They could probably use it. Also, don't forget to get your free Receiving Support While Grieving guide in the show notes below.